After my wife's funeral, I never told my daughter about the secret lakeside villa she had left me. 3 weeks later, my son-in-law shoved legal papers across the breakfast table and said, "Sign them. You're moving into memory care." My daughter smiled as she handed me a bottle of vitamins. I took one without a word. They thought I was losing my mind. They had no idea the villa held the evidence that would destroy them both. Thank you for being here with me today. Before the story continues, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever discovered someone close to you wasn't who you thought they were? Drop a comment below. Your voice matters here. Just a quick note, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling. What I hope stays with you is the message itself. The brass key felt heavier than it should have when Bernard Stratton placed it in my palm, his eyes darting away the moment our hands touched. But that came later. First there was the emptiness. 3 weeks after Laverne's funeral, I still woke at 6 every morning and reached across the bed before remembering she wasn't there. The Lake Forest house we'd shared for 44 years felt too large now. 4 bedrooms that echoed when I walked through them, emptier than they'd ever felt, even when Bernadette had grown and moved away. At 70 years old, I'd spent my entire adult life as Laverne's husband. Widowhood fit like a coat, several sizes too big. I wandered from room to room that November morning, touching things she'd touched. Her reading glasses on the nightstand, the coffee mug with the chipped handle she'd refused to throw away. In our bedroom, her perfume, something floral and light, still clung faintly to the pillow. The phone rang at 11:37. "Mr. Wolfe, this is Bernard Stratton. I need you to come to my office immediately. There's a private matter Mrs. Wolfe arranged before her passing." I knew Bernard's voice, smooth and professional, the voice of a man who'd handled our estate planning for nearly 3 decades. But something in his tone made me straighten. "What kind of matter?" "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you be here by 1 o'clock? After 44 years of marriage, I thought Laverne and I had no secrets. We'd managed our finances together every Sunday morning at the kitchen table, checkbook, mortgage statements, retirement accounts, spread across the oak surface. I knew every asset we owned, or so I believed. Bernard's office occupied the 14th floor of a Michigan Avenue building overlooking Lake Michigan. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, interrupted by shelves packed with leather-bound legal volumes. Bernard, 60 years old, with immaculately styled silver hair, sat behind a mahogany desk in a charcoal suit that fit too perfectly to be off the rack. He stood when I entered, but barely met my eyes. "Nelson, thank you for coming." He gestured to the leather chair. "Please sit." Through the window behind him, November clouds hung low over the water. Bernard opened his desk drawer and removed a small brass key. "This key belongs to a property Mrs. Wolfe held under a separate trust," Bernard said. His fingers trembled slightly. "The envelope is to be opened only by you, Nelson." The name slip hung in the air between us. Richard had been Laverne's father, dead for 15 years. "A property." I picked up the key. It was warm from Bernard's palm, oddly heavy. "What property?" "A villa in Winnetka." Bernard slid trust papers across the desk, Laverne's signature at the bottom, dated 5 years ago. "It was registered under the Lake County Community Water Conservation Trust. Your wife was the primary trustee." I stared at the address, 847 Sheridan Road, Winnetka, less than 20 miles from our house, and I'd never heard of it. "Laverne and I managed our finances together," I said slowly. "Every Sunday at the kitchen table." "How did she—" "I'm only the messenger, Mr. Wolfe. The instructions were very specific. The key and envelope were to be delivered 3 weeks after her passing, no sooner." How many other rooms in our home held secrets I had never thought to question? I turned the key over in my palm. The metal had warmed further, or maybe my hands had gone cold. You've been our attorney for 30 years, Bernard. You never mentioned this. That attorney-client privilege. Mrs. Wolf's instructions were explicit. I was bound by... By what? By her request to keep secrets from her own husband. Silence filled the office. Outside, a gull wheeled past the window. Bernard's hands moved from the desktop to his lap, hidden from view. I've fulfilled my obligation as executor. The property is yours now, along with whatever Mrs. Wolf chose to explain in that letter. Is there something you're not telling me? I've told you everything I'm authorized to disclose. He stood, signaling our meeting had ended. The villa has been maintained by a property management company. It's ready whenever you choose to visit. I rose slowly, tucking the envelope into my jacket pocket. The brass key remained in my palm, growing warmer with each passing second, a physical weight that somehow felt like the beginning of everything unraveling. Bernard extended his hand for a farewell shake, then seemed to think better of it and let it drop. I'm very sorry for your loss, Nelson. Laverne was a remarkable woman. Yes, she was. I looked at him across the polished mahogany desk, noticing for the first time how he wouldn't hold my gaze for more than a second. His hands had trembled when passing me the envelope just slightly, but I had spent 40 years reading blueprints and structural stress points as a civil engineer. I knew the difference between normal nervousness and the weight of concealed truth. The brass key sat heavy in my palm, and I realized that the question wasn't just what Laverne had hidden from me. The real question was why Bernard, our trusted family attorney for 3 decades, looked like someone who had just handed over evidence of his own betrayal. I walked to the door, then paused. I left his office with the brass key warming my palm and the sealed envelope in my jacket pocket. The elevator descended 14 floors, while I stared at Laverne's handwriting on the cream-colored paper. 44 years of marriage. Sunday mornings at the kitchen table. Every bank account, every investment, every decision made together, except this one. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and I stepped out into the November cold, wondering what other secrets my wife had kept, and why the man I'd trusted for 30 years couldn't meet my eyes when handing them over. I drove north on Sheridan Road with the brass key in my cup holder and Bernard's guilty expression replaying in my mind. 40 minutes through November, traffic passed suburban neighborhoods that gradually grew wealthier until I reached the address on the tag 847 Sheridan Road, Winnetka. The villa shouldn't have looked lived in, but every light in the 3-story property blazed against the November dusk, and the garden was so perfectly manicured it could have been photographed for a magazine that very morning. I sat in my car for a full minute staring. The house was Victorian pale blue with white trim wraparound porch gables and dormers that caught the last rays of daylight. Boxwood hedges lined the walkway in geometric precision. The lawn showed fresh mowing stripes. Not a single leaf littered the stone path, despite the oak trees overhead having shed their fall colors weeks ago. Someone had been caring for this place. Recently, regularly. I got out of the car, brass key growing warm in my palm. The front porch steps were swept clean. A brass mail slot in the door gleamed as if polished yesterday. Through the windows, I could see furniture not covered in dust sheets like an abandoned property, but arranged as if someone might return at any moment. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh flowers. A vase of white chrysanthemums sat on the entryway table, real flowers, not silk petals, still firm and fragrant. I touched one. Fresh. Perhaps 2 days old. My footsteps echoed on hardwood floors as I moved deeper into the house. The living room stretched before me with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Furniture in cream and navy blue, tasteful but not ostentatious. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that looked read rather than decorative. A few framed photographs sat on the mantel landscapes, mostly nothing personal. But it was the cleanliness that unnerved me most. No dust on the surfaces, no cobwebs in the corners. The windows sparkled. Someone had been in this house within the last week, maybe the last few days. 44 years, I said aloud to the empty room. She kept this place running for 44 years, without saying a single word. The envelope in my jacket pocket felt suddenly heavy. I sat on the cream sofa facing those enormous windows, pulled out Laverne's letter, and broke the red wax seal with my thumb. The paper inside was thick, expensive, the kind she used for important correspondence. Her handwriting filled several pages, elegant script in blue ink that had faded slightly with time. The date at the top made my breath catch: March 2015. 10 years ago. How many conversations had we shared over those 10 years, where she wanted to tell me, almost told me, then chose silence instead. My dearest Nelson, the letter began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and Bernard has finally done what I asked. Given you the key to the part of my life I kept hidden. I know this will hurt you. I know you'll wonder why I kept this from you. Please understand, I did it out of love, not deception. My hands trembled slightly as I continued reading. This villa came from my father, the man I never spoke about, the one I cut ties with 3 months before we married. You knew I grew up in a wealthy family. What you didn't know was how toxic that wealth became. My father was a tyrant who believed money gave him ownership over people's lives, especially mine. When I chose to marry you instead of the banker he'd selected, he threatened to disinherit me. I told him to keep his money. We built our life together on honest work, your engineering career, my teaching, and I never regretted it. I paused, looking around the villa. This didn't look like something she'd rejected, but my father never removed me from his will. The letter continued. When he died in 2005, the estate attorney contacted me. I could have told you then. I should have. Instead, I created the trust, kept the villa, and let you believe we'd built everything ourselves because we had Nelson. This place was just an accident of birth. Our Lake Forest home, our retirement savings, the life we made that was ours. Real. Earned. My throat tightened. Reading her words, not from anger at the secret, but from recognizing the fierce protectiveness that had driven every choice she made. I wanted Bernadette to grow up grounded, she wrote. To learn the value of hard work to build her own life without waiting for an inheritance. I watched too many of my father's friends raise children who became hollow, entitled shells of human beings. Our daughter is better than that. She's strong because she had to be. She's capable because we never gave her an easy path. I could hear Laverne's voice in every word, practical, determined, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Then came the final paragraph, and my blood went cold. The villa is yours now to do with as you see fit. But Nelson, please don't tell Bernadette about this. Not yet. Not because she's greedy or weak, but because the man beside her is watching every asset we own. I've seen it in his eyes at family dinners, the way Thaddeus calculates, assesses, measures everything in terms of what it might be worth. I don't trust him. I never have. And I'm afraid that if Bernadette knew about this villa, about the trust, he would find a way to take it from her. Protect our daughter from her own husband. Please. With all my love, Laverne. I read the final line 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Thaddeus Harrington. My daughter's husband of 15 years. A quiet man who worked in finance, rarely spoke at family dinners, seemed more interested in his phone than our conversations. I'd always thought him simply reserved, perhaps a bit awkward in social situations. Bernadette seemed happy enough with him, but Laverne had seen something else. Something that frightened her enough to hide an entire villa, an entire inheritance, to keep it away from him. I folded the letter carefully, my hands steadier now, despite the confusion flooding my mind. Through the living room windows, Lake Michigan stretched dark and endless under the November sky. The villa stood silent around me, this beautiful secret Laverne had maintained for a decade, protecting it from a threat I hadn't even known existed. What had she seen in Thaddeus that I had missed? And why hadn't she simply told me her suspicions while she was still alive to explain them? I drove home from the villa as darkness settled. Laverne's letter folded in my pocket. Sleep came in fragments. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Thaddeus at Sunday dinners, quiet and unremarkable, while Laverne watched him with an expression I'd mistaken for tolerance. The next morning, I woke to coffee brewing and found my daughter in my kitchen. The warmth in Bernadette's voice felt wrong somehow, like coffee that had been reheated one too many times, the right temperature. But something fundamental had changed in the process. "Dad, you're finally up." She turned from the counter with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I let myself in. I hope that's okay. Bernadette Wolfe, 40 years old and impeccably dressed, even for breakfast, moved through the kitchen with practiced care, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her voice honey-sweet, as she placed a small white box with a pharmacy label on the table. Thaddeus Harrington sat across from me, 42, and perpetually silent, absorbed in the Tribune. His stillness felt less like disinterest, and more like the careful invisibility of someone who preferred to let his wife do the talking. "I picked these up for you yesterday," Bernadette said. "Vitamins, they help with memory and stress. Natural ingredients perfect for seniors." I looked at the box. "I don't need vitamins, Dad." Her voice softened. "I've noticed you seem a bit confused lately. Missing appointments, forgetting conversations. It's completely normal at your age, but these might help." I stared at her. I hadn't missed a single appointment. I'd forgotten nothing. Grief had made me tired, not senile. "We just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself now that Mom's gone," she continued, hand resting on my shoulder. When had my daughter learned to lie so smoothly, and how had I spent 40 years never noticing the calculation behind her concern? "Thank you," I said, picking up the box. "That's thoughtful." Thaddeus turned a page. The sound seemed unnaturally loud. How are you managing?" Bernadette asked. "The house must feel so empty." "I'm managing. If you need help with anything, bills, paperwork, decisions, Thaddeus and I are here. You don't have to carry everything alone." I looked at her carefully. She met my gaze with perfect compassion, head tilted, hand still on my shoulder. Everything about the gesture was textbook sympathy. But Laverne's words echoed. The man beside her is watching every asset we own. Except Thaddeus wasn't watching. He sat 3 feet away, engrossed in the Bears' playoff chances, as if this conversation had nothing to do with him. Maybe that was the point. They stayed another hour before leaving with promises to check in soon. I watched through the window as they got into Thaddeus's black BMW and drove away, the perfect concerned daughter returning to her own life. I waited until their car disappeared, then walked upstairs to Laverne's bedroom. I'd avoided this room for 3 weeks. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her reading glasses sat on the nightstand. The air held a faint trace of her perfume. Today I had to start sorting. I began with the closet, pulling down boxes from the top shelf. Photo albums, scarves, she'd never worn a jewelry box from our 20th anniversary. The jewelry box felt heavier than it should have. Inside, beneath costume jewelry and broken watch bands, I found a business card. Suburban real estate agency specializing in lakefront properties. Margaret Peterson, Senior Villa Specialist. On the back, written in pencil in Laverne's precise handwriting, Bernadette asked about price of this house. March 2025. March. 8 months ago. Laverne was still alive then, though weakening. Still sharp enough to write this note and hide it where she knew I'd find it. The pencil marks were faded, but deliberate, written in Laverne's careful hand, as if she'd been documenting evidence she knew I would eventually need to find. This wasn't just any real estate card. This was a specialist in luxury lakefront villas, exactly the kind who would handle the Winnetka property. But the villa was registered under the Lake County Community Water Conservation Trust, a name that appeared nowhere in our joint financial records. Laverne had been meticulous about keeping it separate, creating layers of protection to ensure it stayed hidden. For Bernadette to have found this address, to have contacted an agent about its value, she would have needed access to papers Laverne kept locked in her personal safe. Documents that weren't in our shared filing cabinet, weren't in the desk drawer where we kept joint accounts. Private papers, secret papers, papers my wife had deliberately hidden from everyone, including me. I looked down at the vitamin box Bernadette had placed in front of me that morning. Her voice sweet as she mentioned my confusion, my supposed memory problems that didn't exist. Laverne's warning echoed. The man beside her is watching every asset we own. But what if Laverne had written that to protect me from a truth too painful to state directly? What if the real threat wasn't the quiet husband who sat reading newspapers? I turned the business card over in my hands, watching the pencil marks catch the fading afternoon light. The villa was registered under a trust company name invisible in our records. For Bernadette to know the address, to calculate its value, she would have needed to break into Laverne's locked safe, to search through her dying mother's private papers while pretending to care for her. March 2025, 8 months ago. Laverne was dying and our daughter was rifling through her secrets, adding up assets, planning for an inheritance she couldn't wait to claim. I sat on the edge of Laverne's bed, business card in one hand, vitamin box in the other. Maybe Laverne's warning wasn't about the man beside Bernadette at all. Maybe it was about Bernadette herself, and my wife hadn't been able to bring herself to tell me that our daughter, the child we'd raised, the woman we'd loved, had been searching through her dying mother's private papers, calculating the value of assets she couldn't wait to inherit. The warmth in her voice that morning, the practiced concern, the vitamins for confusion I didn't have. I looked at the white pharmacy box and wondered what was really inside. I spent 2 days staring at the business card that proved Bernadette had been searching through her dying mother's papers, wondering if I'd misread everything about my family. Then my foot caught the loose carpet edge at the top of the stairs, and for one crystalline second, I felt gravity take hold. The polished wood floor, 14 steps below, rushing up to meet me. My hand shot out, fingers closing around the banister. Pain flared through my wrist. I hung there, one foot suspended over empty air. Oh my God, are you okay? Bernadette appeared at the bottom of the stairs as if she'd been waiting. She ran up, face painted with perfect concern. Now I heard the noise, you could have broken your neck. I'm fine. The carpet just... You need to sit down. I'm calling 911. She already had her phone out. My father nearly fell down the stairs. Yes, he's conscious. He's 70 and recently widowed. I've been worried about him. 10 minutes later, paramedics filled my living room while Bernadette hovered nearby. He's been very confused lately, she told them. Forgetting things, losing his balance. I've been worried this would happen. One paramedic turned to me. Sir, have you been experiencing any dizziness or memory problems recently? No, the carpet was loose, that's all. But I saw the look they exchanged, the way they glanced at Bernadette with sympathy. After everyone left, I climbed back upstairs. The carpet had been secured with brass nails along the edge. I knelt, running my fingers over the spot. 2 nails were missing, removed cleanly, leaving smooth holes in the wood. The carpet edge had been deliberately loosened. I checked the bathroom trash. Disposable gloves still smelling faintly of latex. I pulled up the doorbell camera footage. Thaddeus leaving for work at 6 that morning. No other visitors. The carpet had been fine last night. Only Bernadette had been in the house when those nails were removed. How long had she been planning this? How many months? How many careful calculations before she decided her parents' lives were obstacles to be systematically removed? The next afternoon, I found Bernadette's tablet left unlocked on the living room sofa. She'd gone to the grocery store. The screen showed a folder labeled Dad Health Records. Something cold settled in my chest. Inside were dozens of video clips carefully dated. I tapped the first one, me in the kitchen searching for my reading glasses. 30 seconds of normal behavior. Next clip, me falling asleep on the sofa with a book. Another me asking Bernadette what day it was, then asking again 10 minutes later because I'd been distracted. One after another, misplacing keys, spilling water. Forgetting I'd already asked a question. Dozens of tiny moments everyone experiences carefully edited to create an impression of severe cognitive decline. The folder's creation date made my breath stop. August 15th, 3 months before Laverne died. She had been recording me while her mother was dying. Every confused moment, every minor mistake cataloged like evidence. I set the tablet down, hands steadier than they should have been. That evening, I examined the vitamin box Bernadette had given me. I'd been too suspicious to take any. Now I poured the capsules into my palm. Most were identical white powder through clear gelatin. But one had a different shade, the powder inside more cream-colored. I wrapped it carefully and drove to Fletcher's pharmacy. Harold Fletcher, 68 years old with wire-rimmed glasses and white hair thinning at the crown, had filled prescriptions for our family for 3 decades. He looked up from his counter, then gestured me toward the back office when he saw my expression. "What's wrong?" I handed him the wrapped capsule. "Can you tell me what this is?" Harold examined it carefully, then looked up at me over his glasses. "I can't run a full analysis here, Nelson, but I can send this to our testing lab tonight. I know someone who can expedite it." He called me 2 days later, his voice low and grim. "Nelson, this isn't a vitamin. It's diazepam, a benzodiazepine sedative. Low dose, but with daily use. Confusion, drowsiness, impaired coordination, memory problems." I closed my eyes and saw Laverne in the hospital bed, asking me the same question 3 times in 10 minutes, apologizing for her confusion. I'd held her hand and told her it was just the illness, just the chemotherapy, that everything would be okay. "Laverne," I said quietly. "She had those symptoms during her final 3 months." Harold's face went gray. The doctors would have attributed it to the cancer treatment. If someone gave these to her regularly during chemotherapy, it would look like natural decline from the disease. I finished. I sat in Harold's back office, staring at the printout showing what my daughter had disguised as vitamins. August 15th. Bernadette had started recording me 3 months before Laverne died, which meant she'd been planning this while visiting her dying mother in the hospital, holding her hand, promising to take care of me, and all the while slipping sedatives into Laverne's food, making her mother's final days even more confused and frightening. I drove home in the November darkness, my mind crystalline with clarity that felt like ice water. That night, I sat in my bedroom, holding one of the fake vitamin capsules up to the light. 3 months before Laverne died, Bernadette had started recording me while drugging her mother. The stair fall, the videos, the pills, none of this was impulsive. This was a plan that had been running for months, before Laverne even passed. Which meant the question was no longer what Bernadette wanted. It was how far she had already gone to get it. The sedatives, the fake videos, the stair fall. Bernadette had been executing a plan for months, and I still didn't know what she was willing to kill for. The next morning, I decided to find out. The password to Thaddeus's computer turned out to be exactly what I expected from a man who thought himself clever. His childhood dog's name followed by his business school graduation year, the same combination he'd used for everything since I'd known him. I waited until they left for a Saturday morning coffee run. Bernadette's idea announced with forced brightness about getting me out of the house. I declined, citing fatigue from the stairfall. The concern in her voice was perfect, practiced. The moment their car disappeared down the street, I walked into Thaddeus's study. The room was minimalist, white desk, chrome fixtures, everything arranged at precise right angles. His computer sat dark and silent, a monument to order. I typed the password. The screen came to life. His financial records were meticulously organized in folders by year and category. I opened the most recent one and found what I was looking for in the first subfolder, Lakeside Development. The loan document made my chest tighten. Lakeside Senior Living Development, LLC. Principal debt, $800,000. Maturity date, January 15, 2026. 6 weeks from now. I scrolled through the attached documents. Project diagrams, zoning approvals, construction timelines. The development occupied a large parcel of land, about 2 miles from my house, luxury senior living facility, ground floor retail parking structures. Then I saw the site map. My property, my house, my land, was marked with a red arrow and a notation in capital letters. Key access point. Critical path. The development's main entrance required a narrow strip of land that currently belonged to me. Without it, the entire facility was landlocked, accessible only through a residential neighborhood with roads too narrow for commercial traffic. Zoning laws would never allow it. Without my land, Thaddeus's $800,000 investment was worthless. I'd spent 40 years as a civil engineer understanding how systems fail, and now I understood that I was the single point of failure standing between my son-in-law and financial ruin. I photographed everything with my phone, then closed the files and shut down the computer. That afternoon, Bernadette found me in the living room reading the Tribune. She set a glossy brochure on the coffee table, her expression carefully arranged into sorrowful concern. Still, Dad, Thaddeus and I have been talking. After what happened on the stairs, we think it's time to consider professional care. I looked at the brochure. Lakeside Senior Living Premium Care for Distinguished Seniors. The cover showed a beautiful 3-story building with wraparound porches, elderly residents, smiling, and a garden staff in crisp uniforms. The same building from Thaddeus's project files. This facility is wonderful, Bernadette continued. Luxury rooms, full medical staff, activities designed for cognitive wellness. Several families we know have parents there. I'm managing fine, I said carefully. Dad? She sat beside me, hand on my arm. I know it's hard to accept, but you need help that Thaddeus and I simply can't provide while we're working. The confusion, the falling. What if next time you really get hurt? Thaddeus stood in the doorway, the newspaper under his arm, saying nothing. Let me think about it, I said. Bernadette's smile was warm, genuine-looking. Of course. Take your time. We just want you to be safe. After they left that evening, I went to my bedroom and opened my laptop. Searching Lakeside Senior Living lawsuits brought up 3 separate Cook County cases filed in the past 2 years. The first one made me stop breathing. Cook County Superior Court Case. 2023 CH 1 892. Family of Gertrude Haskins versus Lakeside Senior Living LLC. Allegations: coercion, undue influence, elder financial abuse. I clicked through to the case summary. Gertrude Haskins admitted at age 73 for memory care, signed over the deed to her lakefront property 6 weeks into her stay. Her children discovered the transfer only after she'd been institutionalized for 4 months. The facility claimed she'd made the decision voluntarily with full mental capacity. The case settled out of court, terms undisclosed. The second case, Richard Morrison, 78, transferred his investment portfolio valued at $1.2 million to the facility's charitable foundation 3 months after admission. His son filed suit, also settled. The third, Eleanor Voss, 81, signed away her rental properties, settled. The system was perfect, elegant, even drug me into confusion document. The decline institutionalized me in their own facility, then coerce the property transfer using methods that had already survived multiple lawsuits. I scrolled back to the development files I'd photographed. The facility and the beautiful brochure photos didn't exist yet. It was scheduled for groundbreaking in March 2026, 2 months away, contingent on final land acquisition. My land. The lawsuits were all against an existing lakeside facility in another location. Thaddeus was building a second one using the same name, the same methods, the same coercive playbook that had already proven successful, and I would be one of the first residents. I sat in the darkness. The glossy brochure open on my lap next to the printed court documents detailing families who had sued to recover their parents' property. The facility in the beautiful photographs was the same facility Thaddeus was $800,000 in debt to build. Once they got me inside those walls, I would become exactly like Gertrude Haskins and the others, an elderly resident with documented cognitive decline, signing away assets I no longer had the legal capacity to protect. The stairfall hadn't worked, so they'd moved to Plan B. Professional institutionalization. Medical documentation. Legal coercion wrapped in the language of caring for a confused elderly man who couldn't take care of himself. They weren't planning to send me to a nursing home. They were planning to lock me inside a cage they had specifically designed to strip me of everything I owned, and they needed me alive to do it at least long enough to sign the papers. They wanted to lock me in a cage they'd built specifically to strip away everything I owned. But first, they needed legal documentation to make it all appear legitimate. The next morning, I went looking for it. The signature at the bottom of the power of attorney document looked almost exactly like mine. The same confident slant, the same abbreviated middle initial, but I had never signed this paper, never even seen it before. And the forgery was good enough to fool anyone who didn't know the specific pressure points where my pen naturally hesitated. I found it in Thaddeus's desk drawer, filed under Estate Planning Draft. The document granted Bernadette full legal authority over my finances, medical decisions, and property transfers. All it needed was a witness signature and a notary stamp to become legally binding. I photographed every page, then called Robert Manning. Robert Manning, 72 years old, with reading glasses perpetually sliding down his nose, had spent 40 years authenticating construction contracts alongside me, testifying in fraud cases where a single misplaced signature could cost millions. He ran a small document analysis office in Evanston, cluttered with magnifying equipment and reference files that filled every available surface. He studied my forged signature for 20 minutes in silence, occasionally making notes before looking up with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. "This is sophisticated work, Nelson. Whoever did this had access to a signature written with your good fountain pen. The pressure points match your formal signing style, not the casual scrawl you use for checks. Can you tell where they got it?" He pulled out the documents I'd brought for comparison: old contracts, bank forms, mortgage papers. I compared it to these samples. The match isn't perfect to any of them. But look here. He placed the forged document next to a photocopy I'd made weeks ago of Laverne's amended will. This was traced from your signature on Laverne's amended will. See the specific loop on the W, the way the pen lifted slightly before the final stroke. That's your formal signing style. The one you use for legal documents you know are permanent. And there's only one place that will exist, I said quietly. Bernard Stratton's private client files, Robert confirmed. How many times had I sat across from Bernard's desk signing estate documents and trusts, while he smiled and called me by my first name, knowing even then that he was handing my daughter the keys to destroy everything Laverne and I had built. 2 days later, I sat in a quiet coffee shop in Lincoln Park's corner booth, waiting. Claire Donovan arrived 15 minutes late, looking over her shoulder twice before sliding into the seat across from me. 36 years old, dark circles under her eyes, hands that wouldn't stop moving. She'd worked as Bernard's legal assistant for 8 years before quitting 2 months ago. I'd found her name in Bernard's office directory and tracked her down through LinkedIn. When I'd called, she'd agreed to meet immediately, too quickly, as if she'd been waiting for this conversation. "Thank you for seeing me," I said. She shredded a paper napkin between her fingers. "I owe you more than a conversation, Mr. Wolf. I owe you an apology." "And for what?" "Thaddeus Harrington contacted me 6 months ago. Offered me $15,000 just for your bank routing numbers and account details. Personal information from your files." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I needed the money for my daughter's surgery. Her insurance wouldn't cover the specialist. I thought it was harmless, just competitive intelligence for some business deal." I kept my voice steady. "What else did you give him? Account statements, property tax records, anything in your file that wasn't legally privileged?" "But Mr. Wolf, I swear I never knew about any villa." "Mrs. Wolf must have kept it completely separate from Bernard's office because I processed all her regular estate documents. If there was a Winnetka property, it never touched our files." That made sense. Laverne had registered the villa through a different trust company specifically to keep it invisible to anyone searching Bernard's records. "Is that why you quit?" I asked. Partly." Claire's hands shredded another napkin. "But also because of what I saw after your wife died. The coffee shop noise, espresso machine, hissing conversations, humming seemed to fade." "What did you see?" "Bernard went into the file room alone. It was late, maybe 8 at night, 3 days after Mrs. Wolf's funeral. I was still finishing my 2-week notice, closing out client matters. He thought everyone had gone home." She looked down at the pile of shredded napkin pieces. "I saw the deletion log the next morning. He'd deleted multiple files from Laverne Wolf's digital folder. Not routine cleanup, specific documents deliberately destroyed." Bernard Stratton had stood beside me at Laverne's funeral, his hand on my shoulder, his voice thick with what I thought was genuine sorrow. And the entire time he'd already deleted the files that would have proven what my daughter had done to her own mother. "Did you see which files?" "No. Just the deletion timestamp and count. 7 files removed between 8:45 and 9:30 p.m. on November 20th. 4 days after Laverne died. While I was still trying to remember how to breathe, Bernard had been systematically erasing evidence." "Why didn't you report this?" Claire's laugh was bitter. "To who? Bernard's been practicing law for 40 years. He's on the Illinois Bar Association Ethics Committee. I'm a legal assistant with a daughter who needs ongoing medical care. Who would believe me?" She had a point. "But you're telling me now," I said. "Because I can't sleep anymore, Mr. Wolf. Because I took money to betray a client, and then I watched my boss destroy evidence after a woman died, and I did nothing. So yes, I'm telling you now. Whatever you need from me, testimony, affidavits, anything, I'll provide it." I sat across from Claire in the coffee shop's corner booth, watching her nervous hands create small mountains of shredded paper napkin. The man I had trusted for 30 years, who had drafted Laverne's will, who had held the key to her villa, who had looked me in the eyes and claimed to know nothing about why his hands trembled, had been complicit from the very beginning. Bernard hadn't just passively enabled Thaddeus and Bernadette. He'd actively participated, selling access to my private documents, providing the signature source for forgery, then destroying evidence of Laverne's suspicions while I stood at her graveside, trying to understand how to continue living without her. The question now wasn't just who was trying to steal my assets. It was how deep the conspiracy ran and whether anyone in my life had ever actually been on my side. Bernard had been complicit from the beginning, destroying evidence while I grieved. But if Laverne had suspected Bernard too, she would have left me proof. I needed to find where she'd hidden it. The house at the business card address had boarded windows, an overgrown yard choked with dead weeds, and a faded, condemned, unsafe structure. Notice stapled to the front door, this was no secret villa, and Laverne had left it for me to find for a reason. I stood on the cracked sidewalk 15 miles north of the real Winnetka property, staring at what should have been a second piece of valuable real estate, but was actually a condemned shell scheduled for demolition. The notice was dated 2019, 7 years of decay. No lakefront view, no aquifer, no value whatsoever. I pulled out the business card I'd found in Laverne's jewelry box. Margaret Peterson, the realtor Bernadette had contacted 8 months ago. The penciled note on the back read, "Bernadette asked about price of this house. March 2025. This house, this worthless condemned property." Laverne had deliberately planted this address in her personal safe, the locked space where she kept documents she never wanted anyone to see. And when Bernadette had broken in to search for hidden assets, she'd found this address and immediately contacted a realtor to assess its value. A test, I said aloud to the empty street. A trap. And my daughter walked right into it. Laverne knew. She knew everything, and she was building evidence the entire time. I drove back to the real villa, the one that actually mattered, my mind racing. If Laverne had been this strategic about exposing Bernadette's snooping, what else had she prepared? The Winnetka Villa's front door opened before I could knock. Constance Hartley, 62 years old, with the sharp, observant eyes of someone who had spent 30 years investigating white-collar fraud for Cook County, stood in the doorway. I'd assumed she was the property caretaker based on the fresh flowers and spotless rooms. I'd been wrong, Mr. Wolf, she said. I've been expecting you since you found the first key. Please come in. She led me to the villa's study, a room I'd barely noticed on my first visit, dismissing it as just another furnished space. Now I saw it properly, filing cabinets along one wall, a large desk with organized folders, a bulletin board covered with photographs and timelines connected by red string. Laverne had lived with the knowledge that her own daughter was hunting for hidden wealth, while she fought cancer treatments, planning the theft before the funeral even happened. And she'd carried that heartbreak alone rather than burden me with it before I was ready to understand. "I'm not a housekeeper, Mr. Wolf," Constance said, turning to face me. "I'm a retired fraud investigator. Your wife hired me 3 years ago when she first suspected something was wrong. My instructions were explicit: document everything but contact. No one, not the police, not you, until Mrs. Wolf said otherwise. She believed that acting too early without your understanding of the full picture would only give them time to cover their tracks and disappear. She made me promise to wait until you had seen enough to fight back yourself. 3 years. She discovered that Bernadette had secretly withdrawn $45,000 from your family's charitable trust, the one you and Mrs. Wolf set up for community grants. Bernadette used it to pay Thaddeus's gambling debts without telling either of you." I sat down heavily in the desk chair. "I never knew." "Mrs. Wolf made sure you didn't. She covered the withdrawal herself, replaced the money from her personal inheritance account, and then she called me." Constance walked to the filing cabinet. She was very specific in her instructions: maintain the villa, compile the evidence, and when you found your way here, give you everything you'd need to protect yourself. She opened the drawer. Inside were dozens of folders, each meticulously labeled and color-coded. 3 years of financial records, she said, pulling files one by one. Thaddeus's complete bank statements obtained legally through my investigative contacts. Photographs of secret investor meetings about the Lakeside project. Property acquisition targets. Property acquisition targets. She set each folder on the desk. Everything Mrs. Wolf knew you'd eventually need. How many nights had Laverne sat in this study organizing evidence files, knowing she was running out of time, determined to leave me, protected even after death silenced her voice. She knew about the development project, I asked. For 2 years. She photographed investor meetings, tracked property purchases, documented the debt structure. Constance pulled out a thick binder labeled Lakeside Senior Living Complete Timeline. She knew they needed your land. She knew about the institutionalization plan. And she knew that Bernard Stratton was feeding them information from his files. So Laverne had suspected Bernard, too. Why didn't she just tell me? The question came out rougher than I intended. Because you would have confronted them immediately. You would have tried to fix it to save Bernadette from herself. Constance's voice was gentle. Mrs. Wolfe knew you needed to discover it on your own piece by piece until you understood the full scope of the betrayal. She said. Constance pulled out a handwritten note from the front of the binder. She said, Nelson will want to believe the best of everyone, especially our daughter. Don't give him this evidence until he's already seen enough to accept what it proves. I recognized Laverne's handwriting immediately. She was protecting me, I said quietly. Even knowing what Bernadette was planning, she was still protecting me. She loved you, Constance said simply. And she wanted to make sure that when she was gone, you'd have weapons instead of just grief. I looked at the evidence spread across the desk. 3 years of documentation. Proof of everything I'd discovered over the past 2 weeks, and probably more I hadn't found yet. For the first time since finding the brass key in Bernard's office, I felt something besides rage and betrayal. I felt hope. Constance closed the filing cabinet drawer containing Thaddeus's financial records and walked to a second cabinet across the study. Her hand rested on the handle, and she looked at me with an expression that mixed professional calm with something deeper reluctance maybe, or the burden of delivering news she knew would change everything. There's one more folder Mrs. Wolfe prepared, she said quietly. About someone else. Someone she said you trusted more than anyone. And that's precisely what made them the most dangerous. Constance's hand rested on the second filing cabinet, and I braced myself for whatever revelation about Bernard she was about to deliver. But when she opened the drawer and pulled out the thick folder, the label read, T. Harrington, Background Investigation. The photograph showed a younger Thaddeus Harrington, maybe 24 years old, still soft around the edges, standing beside his father at what looked like a company Christmas party, and I recognized the banner in the background because I had hung it myself. Wolfe Construction Company Annual Celebration 2007. My hands went cold. Now, your son-in-law's father died in federal prison 11 years ago, Constance said quietly. Heart disease untreated. You provided the evidence that put him there. I stared at the photograph. Thomas Harrington, my chief accountant for 6 years. The man who'd embezzled $2.3 million from the company through falsified invoices and phantom subcontractors. I discovered the fraud during a routine audit, provided everything to federal prosecutors, testified at his trial. He'd gotten 7 years. Died in year 5. I remember, I said. My voice sounded distant. He had a son, attended the trial, sat in the back row every day. Thaddeus was 26 when his father died. Constance continued laying out documents across the desk. Mrs. Wolfe's investigation shows he spent the next 5 years researching your family, your business holdings, your daughter's social circles, her regular activities. She pulled out a timeline. He didn't meet Bernadette by chance at that charity gala. He bought a ticket specifically because she attended it every year. It was calculated from the beginning. Revenge, not greed, revenge. I stared at the photograph of Thaddeus standing beside his father and felt something I hadn't expected, a terrible aching recognition of grief that mirrored my own, the kind that hollows you out and leaves space for rage to grow unchecked. I understood that doing the right thing 18 years ago didn't make the consequences hurt any less. Thaddeus wanted to destroy you financially, Constance said. The Lakeside project, the debt, the land acquisition, it was all designed to bankrupt Wolfe Construction's legacy and leave you destitute in your old age. But here's what Mrs. Wolfe found most disturbing. Constance pulled out printed emails highlighted in yellow. These are from 2 years ago. Thaddeus laying out his revenge plan, financial ruin, property seizure, forcing you to watch everything you built collapse. She handed me the next page. Bernadette's reply. Why settle for bankruptcy when we can make it permanent? I read it 3 times. Your daughter, Constance said carefully, escalated the scheme from financial revenge to murder. The sedatives, the institutionalization plan, the coerced property transfers, those were her innovations. Thaddeus wanted you to suffer. Bernadette wanted you dead. The woman who'd held my hand at Laverne's funeral, who'd brought me vitamins for my confusion, who'd smiled with perfect concern while loosening the nails on my staircase carpet. My daughter had looked at her husband's plan for financial destruction and decided killing her own parents was more efficient. Laverne wanted you to know, Constance said, because she thought understanding Thaddeus's motive might help you. I don't know. Find some logic in the madness. But there was no logic. Only grief transformed into weapons pointed at the people who least deserved them. I drove home as evening settled over Lake Forest. Constance's evidence files secured in my trunk. The house was dark when I arrived. Bernadette and Thaddeus were out, probably planning my next accident. In my bedroom, I opened the vitamin box Bernadette had given me and dumped the remaining sedative capsules into the toilet. From my jacket pocket, I pulled out a bottle of vitamin B capsules I'd bought that afternoon, identical clear gelatin, similar white powder inside. I refilled the box, carefully matching the original count. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and planned. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen, where Bernadette was making coffee, and Thaddeus sat reading the Tribune. Good morning, Thomas, I said cheerfully. Thaddeus looked up. It's Thaddeus' dad. I blinked, let confusion wash across my face. Of course. I'm sorry. Could you pass the... what do you call it? The orange juice. Bernadette and Thaddeus exchanged a glance. Small. Satisfied. I'd spent 40 years calculating load-bearing structures, understanding that a building's strength comes from knowing exactly which supports can be removed before catastrophic collapse. And now I was applying that same ruthless engineering precision to dismantling the people who had murdered my wife. What day is it today? I asked, pouring coffee with deliberately shaky hands. Tuesday. No, that can't be right. I could have sworn yesterday was Tuesday. It's Thursday, Dad. Bernadette said, her voice honey-sweet with false concern. Remember, we talked about this yesterday. Did we? I set the coffee pot down with a clatter. I must have forgotten. I'm sorry. It's okay. She patted my hand. The pills are really helping you relax, at least. I saw Thaddeus's mouth quirk slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. They thought the sedatives were working perfectly. They thought I was deteriorating right on schedule, losing the capacity to resist as they tightened the noose. I took my vitamin at the table, making a show of struggling with the cap. Bernadette helped me, her touch, gentle, her eyes calculating. After breakfast, I deliberately left my wallet in the refrigerator, then wandered back to the kitchen 15 minutes later, looking confused. Has anyone seen my wallet? I could have sworn I left it on the counter. Bernadette found it next to the milk, her eyes lighting up as she helped me. Under the table, her hand briefly squeezed Thaddeus's in quiet celebration. But my mind was crystalline clear, calculating each move like designing a 40-story building, identifying load-bearing walls, stress points, and exactly where to place the explosives. But every structural engineer knows the most dangerous moment in a controlled demolition is when the target thinks it's still standing strong, right before you trigger the charges you've been carefully placing in the dark. I played the confused widower perfectly for 3 more days, calling Bernadette by Laverne's name, asking about appointments that didn't exist, leaving my reading glasses in increasingly improbable locations. Each performance was a demolition charge carefully placed in the dark. But I needed to know when they planned to spring the trap. The words, "Emergency Conservatorship Petition," glowed on Bernadette's laptop screen in bold 16-point font, and below them in smaller type, I could read my own name listed as respondent, alleged to lack mental capacity for self-care and financial management. I'd shuffled into the living room that afternoon, maintaining my slightly stooped posture, my vague expression, the careful performance of a man losing his grip on reality. Bernadette sat at the coffee table absorbed in her laptop fingers, typing with the efficient rhythm of someone who'd done this kind of work before. She didn't hear me approach. I stood 3 feet behind her chair, close enough to read every word on the screen. Emergency petition for appointment of conservator, pursuant to Illinois Mental Health Code. 755 ILCS 511A3. Petitioner Bernadette Wolf seeks emergency temporary conservatorship over the person and estate of respondent Nelson Wolf, age 70, who lacks sufficient understanding or capacity to make or communicate responsible decisions concerning his person. The petition was complete, professional, devastating. I scanned the supporting documentation list, secretly recorded video evidence showing cognitive decline medical records from Laverne's final hospitalization, noting family concerns about respondent's confusion witness affidavit from Thaddeus Harrington, documenting respondent's recent memory loss and impaired judgment photographs of respondent's unsafe living conditions. There were no unsafe living conditions, but a few strategically placed photos of my deliberately misplaced items wallet in the refrigerator. Car keys in the bathroom would look damning to a judge. Petitioner requests emergency temporary conservatorship pursuant to 755 ILCS 511A3, granting full authority over respondent's person and estate, including but not limited to medical decisions, financial transactions, real property disposition, and involuntary placement in appropriate care facility. Appropriate care facility. Lakeside Senior Living, the cage they'd built specifically for this purpose. I stood frozen behind my daughter's chair, reading the legal language that would transform me from a man into a ward of the state, watching her efficient fingers type notes about appropriate care facility placement, as if she were planning a vacation instead of my permanent imprisonment. Then I saw the calendar entry at the bottom of her screen. File petition Friday, December 13th, 9 a.m. Cook County Probate Court Clerk's Office. Friday, 5 days from now. My heart hammered, but I kept my breathing steady, my posture loose. Bernadette's fingers paused on the keyboard. I shuffled slightly deliberately, scuffing my foot on the carpet. She spun around, eyes wide, laptop screen angling away from my view. "Dad, I didn't hear you come in. Are you looking for something? You seem confused." I blinked slowly, let my gaze wander around the room, as if I couldn't quite remember why I'd come downstairs. I thought, was it lunchtime or did we already? I'm not sure what time it is. Her expression softened into practiced concern. We had lunch 2 hours ago. Remember, you had soup. Tomato, your favorite. Did I? I touched my forehead, a gesture of confusion I'd perfected over the past 3 days. Everything feels so foggy lately. I know, Dad. She stood, guided me toward the armchair with gentle hands. Why don't you sit down and rest? I'll bring you some water. She closed the laptop with a soft click. I settled into the chair, accepting the water she brought, thanking her with vague gratitude. Inside my mind was a calculator running at maximum speed. 5 days. How do you compress 40 years of engineering knowledge? 3 weeks of evidence gathering and a widow's elaborate protective mechanisms into 5 days, 120 hours before the woman who murdered your wife legally erases your right to fight back. Bernadette returned to the couch, but she didn't reopen the laptop. Instead, she picked up a magazine, watching me from the corner of her eye. I pretended to doze, That evening, alone in my bedroom, I pulled up Illinois law on my phone and confirmed what I'd feared. Emergency conservatorship petitions under 755 ILCS 511A3 allowed for immediate temporary orders. A judge could grant Bernadette full authority over my person and estate within hours of the filing, sometimes the same day, if the evidence appeared compelling enough. No trial, no full hearing, just an emergency review of the petition and supporting documents, and I would lose every legal right I possessed. The instant Bernadette walked into Cook County Probate Court on Friday morning at 9 o'clock and handed that petition to the clerk, an emergency judge could sign a temporary order by noon. By 1 p.m., I could be involuntarily committed to Lakeside Senior Living. By 2 p.m., they could start transferring my property using the forged power of attorney. And once I was institutionalized under conservatorship, proving I was mentally competent became exponentially harder. Every protest would be dismissed as the confused ranting of a man who lacked capacity. Every attempt to contact a lawyer would be blocked by Bernadette's legal authority over my communications. The system was designed to protect vulnerable elderly people from exploitation. They were weaponizing it to exploit me. I stood in my bedroom staring at the calendar on my phone. Friday was 5 days away, 120 hours before Bernadette would walk into Cook County Probate Court and file the petition that would make me legally incompetent. Once that petition hit the clerk's desk at 9 a.m., an emergency judge could grant temporary conservatorship within hours, and I would lose the legal capacity to hire lawyers, access bank accounts, or challenge my own institutionalization. Everything I'd been slowly gathering evidence allies understanding now had to compress into 5 days, and the first call I needed to make was to someone I'd never met but Laverne had trusted enough to hire Constance's recommendation for a civil attorney who specialized in fighting exactly this kind of legal ambush. 5 days to dismantle a conspiracy, 3 years in the making. 5 days to protect myself from a daughter who'd decided her parents' lives were worth less than the property they'd leave behind. 5 days before the trap I'd been so carefully mapping would spring on me instead. I had 5 days to dismantle a conspiracy before the conservatorship petition stripped me of every legal right I possessed. But first, I needed to know exactly what I was fighting against. That night, sleepless and calculating, I got my answer in the worst possible way. Bernadette's voice cut through the darkness of the hallway with surgical coldness. We already did this to my mother. Stopping now makes her death meaningless. And I stood frozen 3 feet from their bedroom door, the words hitting me like a physical blow to the chest. It was 11 at night. I'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, running scenarios, calculating timelines, when I heard raised voices from their bedroom down the hall. Not quite shouting, but intense, the kind of argument people have when they're trying to stay quiet but failing. I got up slowly, moving through the dark house in bare feet, keeping to the carpet runner where the floor didn't creak. Their bedroom door was closed, but not latched completely. Light leaked through the crack at the bottom. I pressed my back against the wall in the hallway 3 feet from the door and listened. The stairfall was insane, Bernadette. Thaddeus's voice strained and sharp. He could have broken his neck. I signed up for financial pressure, not killing your father. Don't be dramatic. Her voice was ice. The nails were calculated. If he'd fallen, it would have been injuries, not death. Enough to support the incompetence petition, not enough to trigger a police investigation. You're talking about deliberately injuring a 70-year-old man. We already did this to my mother. Stopping now makes her death meaningless. The pills are working, the videos are ready. Friday we file, and this is over. Silence. Then Thaddeus again, quieter. That was different. She was already dying from cancer. This is something else entirely. No, this is finishing what we started. Your father died in prison because of him. My inheritance was stolen. We're taking back what should have been ours. I pressed my back against the cold hallway wall, the darkness spinning around me, as my daughter's voice, the voice that had said, "I love you, Dad," at Laverne's funeral, calmly discussed, letting her own mother's heart fail, as if describing a minor household repair. "I'm not backing out now," Bernadette continued. "I know the timeline, then stop questioning the method. Friday morning we file. By afternoon he's institutionalized. By next week the property transfers start. This was your plan, Thaddeus. I'm just executing it more efficiently than you had the stomach for." Footsteps approached the door. I moved silently down the hallway, disappearing into my bedroom before the light from theirs spilled into the hall. I lay in bed trembling as their voices continued lower now, indistinct, and eventually went silent. My daughter had just confessed to murdering her mother, and Thaddeus, despite his protests, was still helping plan my institutionalization. The next morning, I waited until their cars pulled out of the driveway. Bernadette to a client meeting, Thaddeus to his office. Both gone by 8:30. I walked to Bernadette's bedroom, the room she'd grown up in, redecorated when she and Thaddeus moved back in to help with Laverne's care. The dresser by the window had a locked bottom drawer, but Bernadette had kept her spare key in the same hiding spot since she was 12 years old, taped to the underside of her nightstand's bottom shelf. The key was still there. I unlocked the drawer and found it immediately. A prescription bottle sealed with the pharmacy's safety cap, completely full of pills. The label read, "Laverne Wolf, Carvedilol, 25 milligrams. Take 1 tablet twice daily. Critical during treatment. Dr. Morrison." The date on the label was 3 weeks before Laverne died. My hands shook as I counted. 42 pills. 3 weeks, twice daily. The entire prescription untouched. I called Dr. Morrison from my car, sitting in the grocery store parking lot, where Bernadette couldn't track my location. "Mr. Wolf, I'm glad you called. I've been meaning to check on you. Doctor, I found Laverne's heart medication. The bottle you prescribed for her final weeks. It's unopened. Every single pill is still here." Silence on the line. Then carefully, that's not possible. Those pills were critical during her active treatment. Without them, her heart failure would have accelerated significantly. "How significantly?" "Mr. Wolf, your wife's cancer treatment put enormous stress on her cardiovascular system. The Carvedilol was keeping her heart stable. Without it, she would have experienced rapid deterioration, confusion, shortness of breath, organ stress." He paused. "Who was managing her daily medications?" "My daughter. Bernadette was staying with us, helping with her mother's care." Another pause, longer this time. "Did Mrs. Wolf ever mention missing doses, forgetting to take them?" I closed my eyes, remembering. Laverne asking Bernadette where her pills were. Bernadette handing her the sedatives. "Here, Mom, these are your heart pills." Laverne confused, trusting, taking what her daughter gave her. "She asked about them," I said quietly. Toward the end, she seemed confused about which pills were which. If you've never held a bottle of pills that could have saved someone you loved, pills that sat hidden in a drawer 30 feet from where they were dying, calling out in confusion, asking where their medication went, you can't understand the specific flavor of rage that tastes like battery acid, dissolving your throat from the inside. Bernadette hadn't poisoned her mother with the sedatives. She'd used them to create confusion, to make Laverne seem like she was experiencing natural cognitive decline from the cancer treatment. And while Laverne grew increasingly disoriented, asking for her heart medication, Bernadette hid the pills that would have kept her alive and handed her sedatives, instead telling her they were her heart pills. Laverne's heart failed, naturally, predictably, exactly as it would without the medication keeping it stable. No poison to detect, no suspicious substances. Just a cancer patient who died from heart complications during treatment, surrounded by her loving daughter who'd been so devoted to her care. I sat on the floor of my daughter's bedroom, holding the unopened medication bottle, turning it over in my hands so the pills rattled inside their sealed container. The prescription label was dated 3 weeks before Laverne died, and I could picture her in the hospital bed, asking Bernadette, trusting, grateful Bernadette, where her heart pills were, why she felt so confused, why everything seemed so hard to remember. The bottle was evidence of murder. But proving intent to kill by withholding medication was nearly impossible without witnesses, which meant I needed to force my daughter to confess again, this time, while someone besides me was listening. I held the pill bottle that could have saved Laverne, knowing that proving intentional withholding was nearly impossible without witnesses. I needed her voice, her confession, something undeniable. Constance called the next morning. "There's something at the villa you need to see." The teak music box played Laverne's favorite Chopin nocturne, but it was her voice, trembling, recorded, impossible, that made my hands shake so badly I nearly dropped it. We stood in the Winnetka Villa's master bedroom. Morning light streaming through windows. Constance opened the small teak box from Laverne's dresser. The music box played automatically, a tiny ballerina spinning in slow circles. Underneath, hidden in the base, was a digital voice recorder no larger than my thumb. "I found it while packing her jewelry," Constance said. "You need to hear this." She pressed play. Laverne's voice filled the bedroom, crackling slightly, but unmistakably hers. The date stamp said 6 months before she died. July 15th. I'm probably being paranoid, but I felt dizzy again after the tea Bernadette made me. It's happened 3 times now. I sat down hard on the bed. The recordings continued. Entry after entry, Laverne documenting things she'd noticed, but couldn't quite believe. Missing heart medication bottles. Bernadette asking for bank passwords, claiming it was for estate planning. Strange confusion that didn't match her usual sharpness. At August 20th. I found my heart pills in the bathroom trash. Bernadette says I must have thrown them away during a confused spell, but I don't remember being confused. Constance's hand rested on my shoulder as I listened to my wife second-guessing her own instincts, explaining away her daughter's behavior as concern rather than malice. Laverne's voice grew weaker as the recordings progressed. The cancer was advancing her words, sometimes slurred, the confusion becoming audible. October 2nd. Bernadette is here every day now. I should be grateful. But I'm so tired, everything feels foggy, I can't find my medication, and when I ask her, she looks at me like I'm losing my mind. I pressed my palms against my eyes. Then came the final recording. 3 days before she died. Laverne's voice, barely a whisper. "If Nelson finds this, I need him to know I'm not imagining things. If Nelson finds this, the person he should watch out for most isn't Bernadette, but..." Silence. The mechanical click of the recorder stopping. But what broke me wasn't what Laverne said. It was what she didn't say. The final recording cutting off mid-sentence, her voice small and afraid. And I would never know who she'd meant to warn me about. "The battery died," Constance said softly. Or she was interrupted. I sat listening to the recordings again, memorizing the sound of Laverne's voice describing her own murder while still hoping she was wrong. Then I drove to Lincoln Park with the voice recorder, pill bottle, and Constance's evidence files. Marcus Caldwell's law office occupied the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone, exposed brick and tall windows overlooking tree-lined streets. 52, silver-haired with steel-rimmed glasses, wearing a tailored navy suit, he'd spent 28 years in estate litigation. Constance had warned me. He's brutally honest, which is what you need. I spread everything across his mahogany desk. Voice recordings, pill bottle, handwriting analysis, Constance's files on Thaddeus's debt, Bernadette's secretly recorded videos. Caldwell listened to the recordings, examined each piece with focused attention. He made notes in red ink, occasionally asking questions, his expression growing grimmer. When I finished, he set down his pen. Mr. Wolf." I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear. Tell me anyway. These voice recordings, Illinois is a two-party consent state. Your wife recorded herself in her own home, which is legal, but using them to prove criminal intent opens you to challenges under the Illinois Eavesdropping Act. A defense attorney will argue inadmissibility. My coffee had gone cold. The pill bottle proves your daughter had access to medication. It proves opportunity. It doesn't prove intent to kill. Without witnesses who saw her withhold the pills, you have suspicion, not evidence. Caldwell pulled the handwriting analysis toward him. This forgery work is solid, but without chain of custody documentation showing exactly how someone accessed your original signature, it's inadmissible expert opinion rather than proof. What about the conservatorship petition, the videos? The petition shows intent to control your assets. The videos show elder harassment at worst, family concern at best. Neither shows attempted murder. So I have nothing. You have a pattern. A very clear, very disturbing pattern. But Mr. Wolf, you don't have a murder case. You have a suicide case, yours, if you pursue this without proper evidence. I stared at the evidence spread across his desk. 3 weeks of investigation. Constance's 3 years of files. Laverne's voice from beyond death. None of it was enough. What do I need? Caldwell leaned back. You need your daughter to attempt murder again, under witnessed, legally documented conditions. Essentially a trap. And how? Make her think she's safe. Make her think you're exactly what her petition claims, a confused elderly man losing his grip. And when she tries again, you have law enforcement ready to document it in real time. He looked at me carefully. Can you do that without becoming the monster you're hunting? I didn't answer. But driving home through December afternoon, Caldwell's advice echoed in my mind. I thought about the $9 million estate Bernadette believed she was about to inherit. The lakeside project that would collapse without my land. The conservatorship filing 3 days away. I had everything except proof. And the only way to get proof was to let my daughter think she'd won, then use her greed as bait to make her reveal herself one final time. I needed to use the estate as bait, make Bernadette think she'd won. But first, I had to understand what I was really fighting for. The answer came the next afternoon at the villa, and it changed everything. The geological survey map Constance spread across my desk showed layers of limestone and sandstone beneath our Winnetka villa. But it was the blue-shaded zone marked Ogallala-class aquifer that made my breath catch. Laverne didn't just own a house, Nelson, Constance said quietly. She owned one of 3 private aquifers left in Cook County. I stared at the map. The blue zone extended beneath the entire villa property and into the surrounding land, a massive underground reservoir of pristine water. How much is it worth? Constance pulled out a folder marked Clear Stream Bottling Company, Acquisition Attempts. Inside were 3 separate purchase offers, each progressively larger, spanning 18 months. The most recent offer was $8 million for exclusive extraction rights. That was 2 weeks before Laverne's fall. $8 million. That's what my wife was worth to them, not the woman, just the water underneath her. She turned them down, I said. It wasn't a question. Constance nodded. All 3 offers. She wrote detailed refusal letters explaining that the aquifer was a community resource, that allowing commercial extraction would deplete the water table for everyone in the area. Very principled. Very Laverne. Where are the letters? She kept copies in her files. Bernard Stratton had the originals as her attorney of record. Constance's expression darkened. Mrs. Wolf's 3rd refusal letter, the one declining the $8 million offer, she filed it with Bernard's office 2 weeks before she died. I found a copy in her personal records here. But when I requested the original from Bernard's files using my investigative credentials, His office claimed no such letter existed. He destroyed it. Clearstream's third offer came 2 weeks before Laverne's fall. She turned it down in writing. Bernard filed that letter in the shredder. I looked at the geological map again, understanding clicking into place. The Lakeside Senior Living Project. Thaddeus's development. It's not really about senior living at all, is it? Partially. But look at this. Constance pulled out the Lakeside project plans I'd seen on Thaddeus's computer, but now she overlaid them on the geological survey. The facility location is positioned directly adjacent to the aquifer boundary. And look at the development timeline. She pointed to a notation I'd missed before Phase 2 commercial partnerships, Clearstream Bottling Extraction Facility. $8 million beneath the rose bushes Laverne planted. 8 million reasons for my daughter to smile while her mother choked on mismatched pills. They were never just trying to steal my land for an access road, I said slowly. They wanted the villa, the aquifer, everything. And they needed you and Mrs. Wolfe out of the way to get it. Constance sat across from me, her expression grim. There's one more thing you need to know. About who orchestrated this. She pulled out a corporate filing document for Lakeside Senior Living LLC. The ownership structure showed multiple investors, but one name jumped out at me. Marcus Stratton, principal investor, 42% ownership stake. The name meant nothing to me. Marcus Stratton, Constance said quietly, is Bernard's younger brother. I stared at her. Bernard sat in my kitchen for 30 years. I said, my voice barely controlled. He drove Laverne to every doctor appointment. He held her hand at our anniversary parties. And the whole time he was protecting Marcus. Not stealing, just delaying. Deleting. Making sure you'd never connect the dots until after the conservatorship went through and Bernadette could sign over the property rights. Bernard wasn't the villain. He was worse, the accomplice who'd never raised a hand. Never stolen a dime, just looked away at exactly the right moments. Laverne's voice recording, I said. The one that cut off. The person he should watch out for most isn't Bernadette, but Bernard, Constance finished. She knew. She'd figured out the family connection between her attorney and the Lakeside investor. That's probably why she created the separate trust for the villa, why she kept it hidden from Bernard's office, why she hired me independently. She was building protection against the person she'd trusted for 3 decades. I thought about Bernard's trembling hands when he'd given me the brass key, the way he'd called me by the wrong name, the files Claire Donovan had seen him delete. How long did he know about Marcus's plan? Mrs. Wolfe's investigation suggests at least 3 years. Marcus approached Bernard with the Lakeside concept. Bernard saw the aquifer opportunity, and instead of advising his clients, you and Laverne, he buried the information and started feeding Marcus intelligence about your assets, your routines, your vulnerabilities. He introduced Bernadette to Thaddeus. I said, the pieces falling together. At that charity gala, Bernard was on the host committee. He could have arranged the seating, the introductions. Very likely, though I can't prove it. Constance closed the file folder, her expression grim. You asked who you could trust, Nelson. Now you know no one in your inner circle except me. Bernard, Bernadette, Thaddeus, Marcus Stratton. They're all connected to this aquifer. I stared at the blue-shaded map, thinking about Caldwell's advice. Make them feel safe enough to try again. Create a trap with legal witnesses. And suddenly I knew exactly how to do it. Because they didn't know I'd found the aquifer. They didn't know about Constance's investigation, about the geological surveys, about the connection to Marcus Stratton. They thought I was still grieving, still confused, still the fool Bernard had been counting on for 30 years. Bernard thought I trusted him. Bernadette thought I was deteriorating. Thaddeus thought his revenge was nearly complete. They were all wrong, and I was going to use that certainty, that arrogance, to make them expose themselves in a way no lawyer could dismiss and no jury could ignore. They thought I was still the fool Bernard had counted on for 30 years. Tomorrow morning, I would prove them right and wrong simultaneously. But first, I needed to build a trap that would hold up in court. Caldwell spread the dossier across my kitchen table, 200 pages of evidence that couldn't convict my daughter of murder, but could damn well trap her into trying again. The sheriff needs probable cause for electronic surveillance, he said. Your handwriting analysis plus Bernard's deleted files gives us that barely. We sat at the Winnetka Villa's kitchen table, Caldwell, Constance, and I, mapping out the next 72 hours with the precision of engineers designing a controlled demolition. So I let Bernard think I'm breaking down, I said. I call him voice shaking, tell him I found some geological survey but don't understand it. And he runs straight to his brother and Bernadette. Constance finished. Tells them you found the aquifer but don't know what you're holding, Caldwell nodded. $8 million you don't even know you're sitting on. They'll move fast. How fast? Within 48 hours of your call to Bernard, I'd expect contact. Bernadette will come asking to help you understand the documents. And when she comes, Caldwell pulled out his phone, showing me an email from Cook County Sheriff's Office. I submitted your evidence package this morning. It's enough for probable cause. I read the email. A judge had granted a limited covert surveillance warrant, allowing law enforcement to monitor attempts at elder financial exploitation in real time. Chukuto. We'll have 3 deputies stationed in the guest house, Caldwell explained. When Bernadette arrives, they'll be recording everything. If she attempts to coerce you into signing documents, makes threats, or tries to take the survey by force, it's all captured. Legal, admissible, final. We were building a mousetrap with my wife's corpse as bait and calling it justice. And if she doesn't take the bait, then Friday she files the conservatorship petition, and we fight it in court, Caldwell said bluntly. But I don't think that'll happen. $8 million is too much to leave on the table. Constance placed her hand on mine. Mrs. Wolfe spent 3 years building this evidence. This is how we honor that. When do we start? Tomorrow morning, Caldwell said. You call Bernard at 9 a.m. Sound confused, vulnerable, desperate for help. Then we wait. They left at sunset. I stood watching their cars disappear, the dossier still spread across the table. That night, unable to sleep, I went to Laverne's study. Her desk was organized exactly as she'd always kept things. Pens in the holder, reading glasses in their case, books about water conservation. In the bottom drawer, I found an unsealed envelope with Bernadette's name written in Laverne's handwriting. Inside was a letter, several pages dated 2 years before she died. Before I show you what Laverne wrote in that final letter, are you still with me? Comment A if you think Bernadette deserves this trap, or B if understanding her motive changes anything, and tell me why in 5 to 10 words. Please note the next detail includes adapted elements for storytelling, but the lesson is what matters. My dearest Bernadette, the letter began. I'm writing this knowing I'll never send it, because I know you wouldn't hear what I'm trying to say. I sat down in Laverne's desk chair, hands trembling. I wanted to give you the villa. You were supposed to have it. When your father and I bought this property 15 years ago, I imagined you here with your own family someday. But the day I found the trust withdrawal, $45,000 gone, no explanation, I knew you'd already chosen Thaddeus over family. $45,000. The family charitable trust. Bernadette had stolen from it to cover Thaddeus's gambling debts. I'm changing the estate plan not to punish you, but to protect what's left. The aquifer isn't just water, it's a resource that belongs to this community. I won't let it be sold to pay your husband's debts. You'll call it theft. I call it consequences. The letter continued for 2 more pages. Laverne explaining her reasoning, her heartbreak, her hope that someday Bernadette would understand. I won't send this letter. You wouldn't hear it anyway. You stopped listening to me the day you married him. For the first time since Laverne's funeral, I understood my daughter. Understanding didn't mean forgiveness. Bernadette had believed the villa was hers by right. When Laverne changed the estate plan after discovering the theft, Bernadette must have seen it as her mother stealing her inheritance. The sedatives, the withheld medication, the murder all flowed from a sense of wrongful deprivation that Laverne had tried to prevent by writing this letter she'd never sent. It didn't excuse what Bernadette had done. It just explained the twisted logic that had allowed her to justify killing her own mother. I folded Laverne's letter back into its envelope and placed it in my jacket pocket. Tomorrow morning, I'd call Bernard, voice shaking just enough to sound broken, and tell him I'd found some confusing geological survey. Then, I'd wait 72 hours for my daughter to walk into a trap baited with $8 million of water she thought I didn't know existed. Understanding her didn't change what she'd done. It just made what I was about to do hurt more. I set the forged trust document on the breakfast table between us, the one that claimed Laverne's estate was worth $12 million instead of $9, and watched my daughter's eyes go wide with the kind of greed that kills. Understanding her hadn't changed what I had to do. It just meant I knew exactly which bait would work. Bernadette reached for her coffee, expression carefully neutral. Thaddeus sat beside her, scrolling through his phone. They'd arrived for what I'd called a family breakfast to discuss my move to Lakeside. I don't understand half these legal terms, Bernadette, I said, sliding the document closer. Something's about mineral rights and water extraction. It says 12 million. That can't be right. She picked up the paper. I watched her eyes scan the paragraphs. Caldwell had drafted a perfect forgery of a trust amendment, backdated 3 years, inflating the estate by $3 million that didn't exist. Let me see that, she said. When did you find this? Last night, going through Mother's desk. I just want to simplify everything before I move to Lakeside. You should have it. She would have wanted you to have it. Thaddeus set down his phone. Bernadette read the document twice, breathing carefully, controlled. I'd given her exactly what she'd been searching for. Proof that I was too confused to understand what I held, too broken to recognize the value. The fake trust listed the Winnetka Villa, the aquifer rights, and a non-existent offshore account. $3 million of imaginary assets designed to make her believe she'd won. Dad, Bernadette said, voice warm with manufactured concern. This is very important. We shouldn't rush into decisions. Let me have our attorney review it first. I don't need an attorney. I need this settled. I let my voice crack. I'm tired, Bernadette. Tired of paperwork and legal terms. If signing everything over to you means I can move to Lakeside in peace, that's what I want. She folded the document, slipping it into her purse. We'll take care of everything, Dad. Don't worry about a thing. 24 hours later, Bernadette arrived carrying grocery bags and wearing the smile she used to give Laverne when she wanted something. I thought I'd cook dinner, she said. You look tired, Dad. Have you been sleeping? I made your favorite pot roast, just like Mom used to. Thaddeus followed, asking about my health with attentiveness he'd never shown while Laverne was alive. They were performing concern, auditioning for caring family in case anyone was watching. I played my part. Confused elder, grateful for attention, overwhelmed by estate planning complexity. I asked simple questions about the trust. I mentioned how nice Lakeside seemed. I let them believe they'd discovered my blind spots instead of walking into one I'd built. Bernadette served pot roast that actually tasted like Laverne's recipe. Thaddeus poured wine and told consulting stories. Neither noticed the micro-camera Constance had installed in the dining room crown molding. Oh, I've been distracted, I said, casually cutting roast. Sent some of your mother's old vitamin bottles to a lab. Kept wondering if maybe she wasn't getting proper nutrition toward the end. Bernadette's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Thaddeus stared at her, then at me. What lab? When did you do that? Last week. County Health Department offers free testing for seniors concerned about supplement quality. Results should be back any day. I smiled vaguely. Probably nothing. I just kept thinking about how tired she seemed those last months. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Bernadette set her fork down with surgical precision. That's very thorough of you, Dad. I'm sure the results will show everything was fine. They left 30 minutes later, pot roast half-eaten, claiming early obligations. I was watching my daughter play Caring Angel while planning which of my wife's pills to poison next. And all I could think was this is what Laverne saw every day for 6 months, before she stopped being able to think at all. I went to bed at 10. The micro camera fed to a tablet Constance had left in my nightstand, encrypted and recording. 3 Cook County Sheriff's deputies waited in the guest house with a covert search warrant authorized to execute when Bernadette and Thaddeus attempted to destroy evidence. At 12:47 a.m., Thaddeus's car pulled into my driveway, headlights off. I watched through the tablet. As they entered through the kitchen, Bernadette still had her key. They moved to Thaddeus's study, where Laverne's pill organizers had been filled every Sunday. Bernadette pulled file boxes from the closet. Thaddeus powered up his laptop, deleting files. They worked in frantic silence, feeding pages into a portable shredder. Then Bernadette produced a metal wastebasket and lighter. The smell of burning paper filled Thaddeus's study. 30 years of trust incinerated in 60 seconds. I pulled on my robe and walked downstairs. The deputies were already inside. Lead investigator, Deputy Sarah Brennan, 15 years on the Cook County Sheriff's Elder Fraud Task Force, had coordinated the surveillance personally. She told me during planning that cases like mine, where the victim built the evidence, were the ones that made her job worthwhile. She nodded to me, then pushed open the study door. Cook County Sheriff's Office, step away from the fire. Bernadette spun around, ash on her hands. Thaddeus froze at his laptop deletion progress at 73%. So it was her. Thaddeus's voice cracked. I didn't know about the pills until after Laverne died. She forged the prescriptions, she switched the medication. Shut up, Bernadette hissed. Deputy Brennan pulled out handcuffs. Bernadette Wolfe, you're under arrest for destruction of evidence conspiracy to commit elder financial fraud and obstruction of justice. Additional charges are pending investigation. You have the right to remain silent. My daughter's wrists disappeared into steel handcuffs. The same hands that cooked dinner 3 hours ago, the same hands that switched my wife's heart medication for placebos. Bernadette stared at me in the doorway, mascara running. How did you know? Her voice broke. You were supposed to be too broken to... How did you know? I didn't answer. I watched Deputy Brennan read her rights, watched deputies bag the burnt documents, watched my daughter realize the confused widower had been performing just as carefully as she had. They took her out through the kitchen. Thaddeus followed in separate handcuffs, still talking, still betraying her. The house went silent. I stood in the study doorway smelling burnt paper, and 30 years of marriage turned to ash, and understood that justice and peace were 2 entirely different things. 2 days after the arrest, Bernadette sat across from me in my own living room. Mascara running, hands trembling, and for 3 full minutes I almost believed she was sorry. Justice hadn't brought peace. It had brought this, my daughter weeping on the sofa where Laverne used to read, flanked by her defense attorney, Lawrence Whitfield, 58 senior partner at Whitfield and Associates, a Chicago white-collar criminal defense specialist, whose reputation for plea deal negotiations preceded him into my home. Caldwell and Constance sat on either side of me, silent reinforcements against the performance I knew was coming. I didn't know where else to go, Bernadette said, voice breaking. Dad, please, just listen. Whitfield opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency. Mr. Wolfe, my client, has authorized me to discuss certain facts that may shed light on the circumstances surrounding your wife's death. True circumstances. I let the word hang in the air. Is that what we're calling premeditated murder now? Bernadette flinched. Fresh tears tracked through her makeup. Thaddeus controlled everything, Dad. The debt, the business schemes, I was trapped. By the time I realized what he'd done with Mom's medication, she was already... You expect me to believe you didn't know you forged those prescriptions, Bernadette? He made me. Her hands twisted in her lap. You don't understand what it was like being married to him. The gambling, the threats. He said if I didn't help him get the villa, he'd leave me with nothing. I was terrified. I watched my daughter cry. Real tears, or something so close to real, I couldn't tell the difference. She'd always been good at crying as a child, when she wanted a toy, when she got caught lying to her mother, when Bernard slipped her money and told her not to tell anyone. How many times had I watched her cry and believed every tear was real? The charitable trust, I said. The $45,000 you stole. Did Thaddeus make you do that too? She looked down. I was trying to save our marriage. I thought if I could just pay off his debts. And the conservatorship petition. The forged neurologist letter claiming I had dementia. That was Thaddeus's idea. I tried to stop him, but you signed the papers anyway. Whitfield cleared his throat. My client is prepared to testify against Mr. Harrington in exchange for reduced charges. She wants to make this right. Make it right. I stood up, walked to the window. Outside the guest house sat quiet in the afternoon sun. The same guest house where deputies had waited while my daughter planned to rob me. My wife is dead. How exactly do you make that right, Dad? Bernadette's voice cracked. I know I can't undo what happened, but I'm still your daughter. Doesn't that count for something? I turned to face her. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by orange jail scrubs and 2 days without sleep. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the girl who'd fallen off her bike at 7, who'd cried when her goldfish died, who'd hugged Laverne at her college graduation and promised to make her proud. Then Constance opened her laptop. Mrs. Laverne left one more thing you haven't seen, she said quietly. Bernadette's tears stopped. Her eyes fixed on the computer screen. Constance turned the laptop to face us all. Mrs. Laverne installed a security camera in her bedroom 4 months before she died. She gave me the footage the week before her death, told me to save it in case you ever needed proof. She pressed play. The video showed Laverne's bedroom empty, afternoon light streaming through the curtains. The timestamp read 4 months before her death, June 15th, 2:30 p.m., a Tuesday, when I'd been at the university teaching summer session. The bedroom door opened. Bernadette walked in alone, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. She went straight to Laverne's nightstand, opened the drawer, and pulled out the weekly pill organizer. She held it up to the light, examining each compartment. Then she opened her handbag, took out an identical pill box, and made the switch. The old organizer, the one with Laverne's actual heart medication, went into her handbag. The new one, filled with placebos that would slowly kill my wife, went into the nightstand drawer. Bernadette closed the drawer, smoothed the bedspread where she'd sat. Then she turned toward the empty room and whispered to the silence, "So keep holding on to this villa until you die, Mom. After that, everything will still be mine." She left. The bedroom sat empty again. The timestamp kept running. Constance stopped the video. Complete silence filled my living room. Bernadette stared at the screen, then at her own hands. The same hands that had switched those pills, the same hands that had just twisted in her lap, pretending to be victims of Thaddeus's manipulation. Whitfield set down his pen. He didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. The woman on that screen wasn't my daughter. She never had been. 4 months, I said. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. You planned this for 4 months. You came to family dinners. You kissed your mother goodbye, and the whole time you were killing her. Bernadette opened her mouth. No sound came out. But the pills didn't work fast enough, did they? I continued. So you added the sleep sedatives, made sure she was too confused to notice what you'd done, made sure I was too worried about her mental state to check her medications. Mr. Wolf, Whitfield said quietly, I need to consult with my client privately. Get out of my house. I walked to the front door, opened it. Both of you, and Bernadette, don't ever call me Dad again. Whitfield gathered his briefcase. Bernadette stood, no more tears now, just a blank expression that reminded me of nothing human. They walked past me in silence. No pleas, no apologies, no more performance. Through the window, I watched her pause beside Whitfield's car, staring back at the villa that had killed her mother and destroyed her life. She didn't look like a daughter anymore. She looked like exactly what she was, a stranger who'd lived in my house for 40 years, waiting for the woman who raised her to die so she could inherit what she'd never earned. Constance closed her laptop. Caldwell put his hand on my shoulder. I stood at the window long after the car disappeared, understanding finally that some people are born broken and no amount of love can fix what was never whole to begin with. Caldwell slid the Conservation Trust document across the table toward Bernadette's lawyer, and I watched my daughter's last hope die before she even understood what she was reading. The stranger who'd lived in my house for 40 years sat between two police officers in my living room, waiting to be taken back into custody after our meeting. Whitfield had requested one final conference to discuss asset disposition before sentencing. He'd expected negotiation, perhaps a settlement that would fund Bernadette's defense in exchange for dropping claims on the estate. What he got instead was the document Caldwell had been holding since Laverne's funeral, waiting for exactly this moment. Whitfield picked up the trust agreement, eyes scanning the legal text. His expression shifted from professional interest to confusion to something approaching disbelief. The Lake County Community Water Conservation Trust was established by Mrs. Laverne Wolf in 2020, Caldwell said quietly. All property rights, including aquifer extraction, are permanently restricted. Mr. Wolf holds life tenancy to reside in the villa. Upon his death, the property transfers entirely to the trust for perpetual conservation purposes. Bernadette stared at the document in her lawyer's hands. Whitfield read it twice. Then he set it down carefully, the way you'd handle something that might shatter. This means, even if probate had gone through, your client would have inherited only the right to live here. Not own, not sell, not develop. That's correct. Caldwell confirmed. The aquifer rights specifically cannot be sold, leased, or commercially exploited under any circumstances. The trust is irrevocable. It was filed with Lake County 5 years ago, long before Mrs. Wolf's death. 5 years. Long before Bernadette started switching pills. Long before the conservatorship petition. Long before any of this began. Bernadette's voice came out as a whisper. 5 years ago. Before any of this started. She knew, she always knew. Your mother, I said, understood what you were long before I did. Constance pulled out another document. Mrs. Wolf also established a community water protection fund. Any attempt to challenge the trust automatically triggers full disclosure of why it was created, including all evidence of elder abuse, financial fraud, and the circumstances of her death. The fund exists specifically to defend against legal challenges from family members. Whitfield closed his briefcase. He didn't need to say what we all understood. There was nothing left to negotiate. No estate to inherit. No assets to bargain with. No reason for any of this to have happened, except the reason it did happen, because my daughter believed she deserved something that was never hers. Laverne had won. From 5 years in the past, from beyond death, she'd protected the one thing Bernadette could never understand. Was worth protecting, water that belonged to everyone, not just us. The $8 million aquifer would provide clean water to Lake County communities for generations. The villa would become an environmental education center. Everything Laverne had built would serve the purpose she'd intended untouchable by the daughter who'd killed her trying to steal it. Mr. Wolf, Whitfield said, standing. I think my client and I need to discuss our options privately. Caldwell and Constance gathered their documents. The police officers stepped outside to wait. Whitfield followed them, leaving me alone with Bernadette for the first time since the arrest. She sat very still, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. The mascara was gone now. So were the tears. What remained looked like something carved from stone, human-shaped, but empty of whatever makes a person real. So all of this, she said finally, voice raspy and flat. The planning, the pills, everything, was for a house I could never have. I stood up, walked to the window. Outside, spring had come to the garden Laverne planted. Tulips she'd never see were blooming exactly where she'd put them. Oh no, I said. All of this happened because you believed your parents' lives were worth less than a house. That's the only thing that was ever real. Silence. Did you ever love her? I asked. Your mother. Did you ever love her at all? Or was she just an obstacle between you and what you wanted? Bernadette didn't answer. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe the question didn't make sense to whatever she was inside. I walked to the door. Stopped. Looked back one final time at the woman sitting in my living room, the stranger who'd killed my wife, the daughter I'd raised and fed and sent to college, and walked down the aisle at her wedding. I had a daughter once. She died the same day her mother did. Goodbye, Bernadette. I walked out, didn't wait for a response, didn't need one. The police officers stood on the front steps, professional and patient. One of them nodded to me as I passed. Constance waited by her car, concern written in every line of her face. Are you all right? She asked. I looked back at the villa. Through the window, I could see Bernadette still sitting in the same chair, staring at her hands. The hands that had switched pill bottles and forged prescriptions and cooked Sunday dinners while planning murder. The hands that had killed her mother for a house that was never going to be hers, for money that didn't exist, for inheritance rights that had been legally eliminated 5 years before she started her scheme. 40 years of memories lived in that house. Christmases and birthdays. Laverne's laugh in the kitchen. Bernadette's childhood drawings still framed in the hallway. The ordinary accumulation of a family that had seemed real until the day it wasn't. I couldn't separate those memories from what I knew now. Couldn't walk through rooms where my daughter had plotted murder. Couldn't sleep in a house where she'd switched pills that killed her mother. I don't know, I told Constance, but I'm not going back in there. Behind me, through the window, Bernadette sat motionless. I didn't look back again. Caldwell joined us on the driveway. The prosecutor called. Bernadette's attorney will likely recommend she accept the plea deal. With the video evidence and Thaddeus's testimony, a trial would be suicide. How long? 15 to 25 years. She'll be eligible for parole at 68. 68. The age Laverne had been when Bernadette killed her. Constance touched my arm gently. Where will you go? I looked at the villa one last time. The house that had killed my marriage, destroyed my daughter, and protected a resource that would serve strangers long after we were all gone. Anywhere but here, I said. We left. Behind us, police officers escorted Bernadette back to custody. The villa sat quiet in the afternoon sun, holding secrets and sorrows, and Laverne's final victory over the daughter who'd tried to inherit what could never be owned. Bernard wouldn't look at me across the Illinois Attorney Disciplinary Commission hearing room, but his hands shook badly enough that I could see them trembling from 3 rows back. 1 week had passed since I'd left the villa for the last time. 1 week since Laverne's final victory became irrevocable. Now I sat watching my oldest friend lose everything he'd spent 40 years building, and I felt nothing. The commission chair, a severe woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair, reviewed the evidence Constance had compiled. 32 years of legal representation. 32 years of undisclosed conflicts of interest, while Bernard's brother Marcus stood to profit from schemes involving his client's property. Mr. Stratton, the chair said, you represented Mrs. Laverne Wolfe for 32 years, while your brother stood to financially benefit from schemes involving her property. This constitutes egregious conflict of interest. Bernard's attorney started to respond, but Bernard waved him off. I never took $1, he said, voice barely audible. I just didn't tell them what Marcus was planning. You concealed material information from your client. The chair continued. You failed to disclose that the Lakeside Senior Living development your brother proposed would directly exploit Mrs. Wolfe's property. You deleted files from her legal records to prevent discovery of your brother's involvement. These actions constitute gross misconduct warranting immediate disbarment. The vote was unanimous. Bernard Stratton, attorney at law for 40 years, walked out of the hearing room 15 minutes later without a license to practice. He didn't look at me as he passed. Constance found me outside in the December cold breath fogging in the Chicago air. Lakeside wasn't his only project, she said quietly. They found 4 other facilities with the same pattern. Isolate elderly owners, pressure conservatorship, acquire undervalued property. Marcus Stratton's company has been running this scheme for at least 7 years. How many families? I have 43 that they've identified so far. The FBI is investigating now. Federal wire fraud, elder abuse conspiracy. Marcus is looking at 20 years minimum. 43 families. 43 versions of what happened to Laverne, what almost happened to me. And Bernard had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to stop it. Enough to say something. Bernard lost 30 years of legal practice for the crime of looking away. My daughter lost her freedom for the crime of looking too closely at what she wanted. 3 days later, I sat in Cook County Courthouse Criminal Division, watching my daughter learn the price of murder. The courtroom smelled like old wood and anxiety. December light filtered through high windows, illuminating dust motes floating above the judge's bench. Outside Michigan Avenue prepared for Christmas lights and wreaths and shoppers carrying bags full of presents for people they loved. I sat in the gallery 3 rows back, watching strangers in uniforms process the destruction of my family. Thaddeus went first. He'd accepted a plea deal 8 years for forgery conspiracy to commit wire fraud obstruction of justice. His lawyer had negotiated well. In exchange for testimony against Bernadette, he'd avoid murder conspiracy charges. He stood before Judge Margaret Henley, 62 years old, 15 years, on the Cook County Circuit Court bench, known for maximum sentences in elder abuse cases and mumbled apologies that convinced no one. The court accepts your guilty plea, Judge Henley said. 8 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. Bailiff removed the defendant. Thaddeus left without looking back. He'd betrayed Bernadette to save himself, just like he'd betrayed his marriage vows for money, just like he'd betrayed basic human decency for property he'd never own. Then they brought out my daughter. Orange jumpsuit. Handcuffs. Hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. No makeup. No tears. Just the blank expression she'd worn since the bedroom video destroyed her final lie. Assistant State's Attorney David Keller. 12 years with the state's attorney's office handling elder abuse cases, laid out the charges with clinical precision. The people recommend 20 to 25 years for elder financial abuse and reckless homicide. The defendant poisoned her own mother for property that was legally impossible to inherit. Bernadette's lawyer argued for leniency. talked about Thaddeus's manipulation, mental health considerations, the fact that Laverne's death certificate listed natural causes, making premeditation difficult to prove. Judge Henley listened without expression, then she watched the bedroom video. We all watched it again, Bernadette switching pill bottles, whispering to an empty room about waiting for her mother to die. The courtroom went silent. By Mrs. Harrington, Judge Henley said, "You have been found guilty on all counts. The sentence of this court is 25 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections without possibility of early parole." The gavel struck at 10:47 a.m., and all I could see was Bernadette at age 5 holding Laverne's hand in this same courthouse when we finalized her adoption paperwork. Same building, different daughter. Or maybe she was always this person and I was always blind. Bernadette turned in her seat, eyes searching the gallery until they found me. "Dad," she started. I looked down at my hands. The same hands that had held her when she was 5 years old. Taught her to ride a bike. Walked her down the aisle at her wedding. The same hands that had signed the adoption papers, giving her our name, our home, our love. The gavel's echo faded. Bailiffs moved forward to escort her out. I didn't look up. I heard her footsteps. Heard the side door open and close. Heard the courtroom empty around me as lawyers and clerks moved on to the next case, the next family, the next tragedy. Constance sat beside me in the empty gallery. "Do you want to leave?" she asked gently. Through the tall windows, Michigan Avenue glittered with Christmas lights. Shoppers hurried past carrying wrapped presents. A Salvation Army bell ringer stood on the corner collecting donations. The city moved forward like nothing had happened, because for everyone else, nothing had. My daughter was serving 25 years for murdering her mother. Thaddeus had 8 years for helping plan it. Bernard had lost his career for enabling it. Marcus faced federal prison for orchestrating the scheme that started it all. Justice, they called it. The system working as intended, but Laverne was still dead. Bernadette was still the stranger who'd lived in my house for 40 years, waiting for her mother to die. And I was still the fool who'd loved them both and understood neither. "When did I stop knowing her?" I said. Constance didn't answer. There was no answer. Outside, Christmas lights glittered on Michigan Avenue, and somewhere in the courthouse basement, my daughter began the first day of 25 years, learning that some houses cost more than anyone should be willing to pay. The Lake Forest house where I'd lived for 44 years felt smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown too large with grief to fit inside it anymore. A week had passed since Bernadette's sentencing. I stood in the doorway holding a single box of belongings, understanding finally that I couldn't stay here. Patricia Reynolds arrived at 2 p.m. Executive Director of the Cook County Elder Justice Foundation 51, a former elder law attorney who now ran free legal aid programs for financial abuse victims across Illinois. She walked through the rooms with professional efficiency, taking notes. "It's a beautiful home," she said. "Perfect for what we need. And what happens to it after the donation? We'll convert it into a free legal consultation center. Intake offices on the first floor, consultation rooms on the second. We serve about 300 families a year currently. With this space, we could double that. 300 families a year, 300 versions of people discovering that the children they raised were stealing their lives piece by piece. Mr. Wolf, this donation will help hundreds of families facing exactly what you went through. We'll name the center in your wife's honor the Laverne Wolf Legal Aid Center, a house built on love, almost destroyed by greed, transformed into shelter for people fighting the same battles Laverne had fought alone." She would have liked that," I said. "Turning what happened to her into something that helps others." Patricia paused at the kitchen doorway. "You're sure about this? 44 years of memories is a lot to give away." "I'm not giving away the memories, just the building that holds them." I stood at the front door one final time. Bernadette's first steps on that hardwood floor. Laverne's birthday parties in the living room. 44 Christmases. A marriage that had seemed solid until I learned how much my wife had hidden to protect me. You can't live in a museum of grief. Eventually, you have to choose stay frozen with the ghosts, or let someone else warm the rooms you're leaving behind. I chose to leave. Christmas Eve found me standing in the Winnetka Villa's driveway, watching movers carry boxes into the house I'd sworn never to enter again. But I was 73 with a daughter in prison and a wife in the ground. The Lake Forest house was gone. The villa was all that remained. Constance met me at the door. She'd spent the week preparing the master bedroom, the room Laverne had chosen in the house Laverne had bought for reasons I was only beginning to understand. I put fresh linens on the bed, she said. And I took the liberty of setting up a few things. If you don't like them, just say so. The bedroom was warm. A fire crackled in the fireplace. The bed was made with thick blankets. And on the shelf beside the bed, in a simple silver frame, sat our wedding photo, Laverne and me, 48 years younger, standing outside the courthouse where our daughter would eventually be sentenced for murder. I put your wedding photo on the shelf, Constance said quietly. I hope that's all right. I picked up the frame. Laverne's smile looked genuine in that photo, unguarded in a way I rarely saw in the later years. Before Bernadette's betrayals, before the trust needed to be hidden in conservation protections. It's perfect, I said. Thank you, Constance. For everything. She moved toward the door, then paused. What will you do with the villa long term? I set the photo back on the shelf. Part of it will become a legal support center. Satellite office for the foundation, maybe. Laverne wanted this place to serve the community. The water, the land, it was never meant to be just ours. And the rest? I'll live here. Honor the Conservation Trust. Make sure the aquifer stays protected the way she intended. For the first time since Laverne died, I felt something besides rage or sorrow. I felt her. Still here. Still taking care of me. Constance stood framed in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. Mrs. Laverne told me once she chose this villa because it catches plenty of morning light. She said you always liked morning light. I looked at the dark window. Outside, Christmas lights glittered on houses across the lake. I'd forgotten that, I said. But she never did. She thought of everything, Constance said softly. Even the parts you'd need after she was gone. She left, closing the door quietly. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wedding photo. 48 years ago, we'd stood on courthouse steps promising to build a life together. We'd kept that promise, built a home, raised a daughter, taught at universities, planted gardens, lived ordinary days that felt extraordinary because we lived them together. Then our daughter had killed her, and nothing would ever be ordinary again. But Laverne had planned for this. The Conservation Trust that made murder pointless. The evidence that made conviction possible. The villa that caught morning light I'd forgotten I loved. Even in death, she'd been thinking 3 steps ahead, protecting me from a future she knew she wouldn't see. Outside Chicago, prepared for Christmas, my daughter sat in a cell, beginning her first week of 25 years. My wife rested in Oakwood Cemetery beneath a headstone that said beloved wife and mother, and I was here, alive, in a house chosen for light. I lay back against the pillows Constance had arranged. The fire crackled. The room smelled like cedar and fresh linens. Through the window, I could see the outline of trees against the winter sky, waiting for morning. Tomorrow the sun would rise. Tomorrow light would fill this room the way Laverne had planned years ago when she bought this villa, thinking of mornings we'd never share. Tomorrow I would wake up in a house that held no memories of Bernadette's childhood. No ghosts of the daughter who'd become a stranger. Tomorrow morning would come. And for the first time in 47 days, I thought I might be ready to see it. The light came exactly as Laverne had promised, pale gold threading through bare oak branches, catching fresh snow like 10,000 small miracles I'd nearly forgotten how to see. I sat on the villa's front porch, wrapped in a blanket, coffee steaming in the frozen December air, watching Christmas morning break over Winnetka. The snow had fallen overnight, transforming Laverne's secret garden into something clean and new, something that felt like a second chance at breathing. 47 days ago, I buried my wife. Today, I was simply here, not waiting for the pain to end, not bargaining with grief, just present inside a morning she had chosen for me before she ever knew I would need it. The light moved slowly across the world. Branches first, then the snow-covered lawn, then the edge of the porch where I sat holding warmth in both hands. I thought about everything with clarity now, not bitterness. Bernard's law license was gone. Thaddeus would serve 8 years. Bernadette, the daughter we had raised and loved and lost to her own greed, would serve 25. Marcus Stratton faced federal prison for schemes that had damaged dozens of families across Illinois. Beneath my feet, protected by a conservation trust Laverne had quietly established 5 years ago, the aquifer flowed clean and untouched, forever safe from the people who would have poisoned it for profit, forever serving the community she died defending. This wasn't happiness, but it might be peace. At noon, Constance arrived with Christmas dinner and an envelope she had held for 5 years, plain white, sealed with Laverne's initials in wax. She said, "You'd know when you were ready," Constance told me, then left me alone with it. I sat holding it a long time, watching snow fall in soft curtains over the lake. When I finally broke the seal, the letter was short. 3 paragraphs in Laverne's neat handwriting. Small memories I had forgotten mattered to her the morning I brought her coffee in bed, after our first year of marriage, the way I had cried at Bernadette's adoption, hearing how I had measured the bookshelves 3 times to make sure they were level. Ordinary moments she had quietly carried for decades. Then the final paragraph. "I didn't leave you a Villa Nelson. I left you a place where no one can ever kick you out of your own life. I hope you find the morning light. I hope it's enough to remind you that even when I'm gone, I'm still taking care of you. There will be mornings. There will be light. There will be coffee on the porch and snow in the garden and windows facing east. I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't stay, but I made sure you'd have somewhere safe to land." I read it 3 times. Then I sat holding it, tears running down my face, not from grief, but from the overwhelming recognition of being completely unconditionally known. Laverne had seen everything coming. The betrayal, the trial, the aftermath. And 5 years before any of it unfolded, she had built me a sanctuary. Not wealth, not property, safety, light, home. I placed her letter beside our wedding photo on the study shelf. Grief is a house you cannot leave until you're ready. But sometimes someone who loves you builds an extra room with windows facing east. And one morning you realize you can stay, but you don't have to stay in the dark. Tomorrow the light would come again. Purpose waiting in legal aid centers, conservation meetings, community water protection. Laverne's legacy, my responsibility. That was enough. That was everything. And to you listening to my story, remember this: the people closest to you can become strangers if greed takes hold. For 44 years, I thought I knew my daughter. I watched her grow, walked her down the aisle, welcomed her into my home every Sunday. But I was blind to what she was becoming. Don't make my mistake. Don't assume family loyalty is automatic. Watch for the signs. Question the inconsistencies. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if it means facing a truth you don't want to see. Laverne understood something. Family justice isn't about revenge, it's about protection. She spent 5 years building a system that would preserve what mattered most even after she was gone. That's what separates Dad's revenge stories that end in bitterness from family justice that ends in peace. Sometimes the strongest response to betrayal isn't confrontation, it's preparation. I believe God gave me the strength to see this through, to honor what Laverne built and ensure the truth came to light. Real family justice means protecting the legacy of those who loved us even when it costs everything. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you faced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you find your way through? Please share this with anyone who might need to hear it. And if you want more dad's revenge stories about family justice and finding peace after betrayal, subscribe to Wise Revenge. Thank you for staying until the very end. As a reminder, some details in this story have been adapted for storytelling purposes. But the lessons about family justice and healing are real. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next story.